Okay, so here's the thing. So we invest in ETFs, we invest in index funds, things that track indexes because we think it should be easy. There are a few things that I think people are making mistakes on potentially when it comes to investing in ETFs with Charles Schwab. And some of them are a bit of that you don't know what you don't know. Look how many Schwab ETFs there are. These are all screenshots of Charles Schwab ETFs, and I would say there's quite a lot. I also think understanding the product offering of a company like a Charles Schwab can really help you to understand the ins and outs of the different ETFs that they offer. Because the ETFs, they are products for us. And understanding a suite of products, I think, can really help us. And as this seed was planted in my head, I realized that there should be something that can help all of us understand Schwab ETFs that's basically like a roadmap on one little piece of paper. Something that we can use to find an ETF or at least understand the whole suite of Schwab ETFs. I've never seen it. I don't think it exists. And so that's what I set out to do. I think this might unlock something for a lot of you. I think it might help you make sense of at least Charles Schwab ETFs. And I think once you understand it better, that's when you will be able to make more money investing in these ETFs. And also, of course, make sure that we don't make some mistakes that I think some of us are making. Let me show you what I mean. So Charles Schwab has 32 ETFs. I needed to make this visual. I needed to have this structured and organized in a way that everyone was going to understand it. So the first thing I did was I created two sections: stocks or equities and bonds. This way we can see how many different stock options there are and how many bond options there are for Charles Schwab ETFs. Now that we have the stocks, now that we have the bonds, what we need to do is we need to find a way to structure this so it's kind of understandable to people and so we can somewhat compare the different ETFs to each other. So when it came to the stock ETFs, here's what I did. I organized it by how big the companies are or the market cap. So larger companies are going to all be structured in the same area. Smaller companies and mid-sized companies are going to be in the same areas. Then I went further and I said, okay, let's go to the style. Is it a growth style, a value style, or kind of a blend of the two? Then I also realized that we need to add some other ones in there. So we have thematic and we also have sector. We'll go over that more in a few minutes, but then the bonds came up and what I did was I said, okay, let's start off with having taxable and non-taxable. And now we can go through every one of these ETFs and we can see it visually and structured and compare them all together. By the way, I am going to tell you how to get this for free if you want to download it. So we'll talk about that later. But first, let's go over the large cap category. All right, let's see this in action now. There are 7 different ETFs inside the Charles Schwab large cap value category. Now, some of these are what's called factor-based. They're going to be a bit more actively managed, and some of them are actually international. And some of them are actually factor-based and international. So the green dot is going to be factor-based ETFs. The brown is going to be international ETFs. So now we can see in one location the rankings based on 5-year returns. So these are all sorted by 5-year return. Highest 5-year returns are on top. FNDX, the Schwab Fundamental US Large Company ETF, that had the best 5-year return out of all the different value ETFs. It had a 14.4% 5-year annual rate of return. Now it did this with a risk based on Morningstar of 3 out of 5. So a bit lower risk than some of these other ETFs, but actually a higher return. That's exactly what you want to see a lot of the time. Risk-adjusted returns that outperform are usually pretty good. Now, here's the other thing though. For some people, it's very important to have the lowest cost ETF, of which this is not. FNDX cost 0.25%. For example, SCHD, which is the third best 5-year return, only costs 0.06%. So herein lies where I think people can start making better decisions and making less mistakes. Are fees important to you? If you really care about having the lowest cost ETF, well, now you can see here that of the value ETFs, SCHD is going to be lower cost than the other 2 ETFs that actually had a better 5-year return recently. But if you care more about cost, then SCHD might be for you if you want something that is considered a value ETF. Now, the other thing that we can see here is the yield. SCHD has one of the highest yields in all of these value ETFs. So the amount of money that you get every year in terms of the dividends that the stocks inside the ETF pay, well, SCHD is going to pay higher dividends than FNDX, for example. So if yield is important to you, then now we can see that SCHD looks a bit better maybe. Now this is value. Maybe you don't care if it's value or blend or growth. So we can see them all together though. Of the blend category, SCHX is the highest 5-year return at 15% annually, with a yield of 1.2% and a cost of 0.03%. So SCHX outperformed every value ETF. And we can see there's only one true growth ETF offered by Charles Schwab, that's SCHG. And that actually had the highest rate of return out of all the ETFs in the large cap category at 19.7% annually. So let's not stop here. There are still more ETFs that Charles Schwab offers inside its product suite. There's also mid-cap, mid-sized companies. Here we only have two types. We have a value and we have a blend. So now we know that we can't go to Charles Schwab and get a mid-cap growth ETF because they don't have one. We have FNDC as the only value ETF in the mid-cap category. And in the blend category, SCHM has the highest return over the past 5 years, but still only coming in at about a 9.3% rate of return. Not quite as high as those other large cap returns that we saw at the top. For the smallest companies, Charles Schwab offers blend. And for these size companies, there's actually no international fund. So now you know you can't go to Schwab and get a small cap, a small company international ETF. FNDA was the highest rate of return over the past 5 years at 10.4% annually. We also have the thematic and the sector. I basically added these here because they don't deserve to be under the other ones, so they get their own spot. Now you might not know these exist, and so now you will. Under the digital assets thematic, there's STCE. This is actually the Schwab Crypto Thematic ETF. Now, this doesn't invest in cryptocurrency. What this does invest in, though, are companies that deal with the space of cryptocurrency. So basically, you're getting exposure to the space, but you're not buying the actual currency. There's also a REIT, or Real Estate Investment Trust type ETF. It's called SCHH, the Schwab US REIT ETF. So that's all the stock offerings that Charles Schwab has. Now, I think that by looking at this, you can actually get a good idea of what is available for you through Charles Schwab. Some of these may now stand out to you. Some of them you may not have known about before. And now you can visually see all of the stock-based options for you at Charles Schwab. Now, one of the common mistakes I think people make is that they don't look at the risk, which is why I included it here. So you can see the risk of all these different ETFs based on Morningstar. And so if an ETF doesn't have a good return, but it has a high risk, maybe it's not the best ETF. Bonds have some extra things that we needed to include. So first I mentioned there are taxable and there are tax-free bonds. Now Charles Schwab only offers one tax-free municipal bond ETF. It's called SCMB. Maybe you didn't even know it existed. So in the bond category, what we're going to include, we have the cost. This cost is 0.03%. It's got a yield of 3.1%, no 10-year return. The average effective duration of the bonds inside this portfolio is 6.1 years. The credit quality of the bonds inside this portfolio on average is medium. The average maturity of the bonds that are held in this portfolio mature in 7.6 years. And the category, according to Morningstar, of this specific ETF is Muni National Intermediate. Now we can see the same thing on all of the taxable bonds. There are 9 different funds available for you at Charles Schwab that are taxable bond ETFs. The best performing of those is SCHP. This is the Schwab US TIPS, or Treasury Inflation Protected Securities ETF. And the thing is, even though it's the best performing out of all these, it didn't really perform well because inflation. The cost is 0.03%, the yield is 3.1%. It only had a 5-year return of 2.2% annually. And the 10-year is also only 2.2%. The risk is 3 of 5, and we won't go over all of these, but look, you can see them all here. What can you take away from this? To me, it's that there are all of these different options for you to invest in different ETFs that are bond ETFs with Charles Schwab. If you're more interested in having a bit riskier of a bond fund or a less risky bond fund, you can see it right here. If you want corporate bonds, well, you can see which one's corporate bonds. If you want a TIPS ETF, you can see the TIPS ETF. You can see it all. This is all on one little piece of paper. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to help people make less mistakes when it comes to not understanding what ETFs are available to them and then being able to find the best ETFs for them for their specific portfolio. To get access to this, go down to the description below. I have a link. You can go over to my website, download it for free, PDF or image, JPEG. I made something very similar to this for Vanguard. Now I'm going to also link to a video where you could check that out. It's more of an artistic expression that I really put a lot of time and effort into it. So I'd love if you supported me and watched that video, because at the end of it, you'll get access to the Vanguard ETF cheat sheet. Thanks for watching. I hope this helped. See you next time.